Hello and welcome to WDSE's Forum in the Northland with the candidates running to be the next St. Louis County Sheriff. I'm Heidi Holtan, News Director at KAXE, a national public radio affiliate in northern Minnesota. I want to thank WDSE WRPT for producing tonight's forum and for letting me be a part of it. St. Louis County is large and diverse. It extends from the Canadian border to the city of Duluth, an area of some 7,000 square miles. In fact, it's the largest county east of the Mississippi River and is larger than 3 states. As you might expect, a county this large poses significant challenges to law enforcement. Tonight, we're going to learn more about the 2 men vying to replace retiring Sheriff Ross Littman to lead 260 employees under the sheriff's supervision. The candidates are current St. Louis County Undersheriff Jason Lukovsky and former Duluth and Wichita, Kansas Chief of Police Gordon Ramsay. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thanks.
Our forum will be a conversation and not a strictly timed debate, but I will make sure each candidate has ample time to answer each of the questions, and we'll begin by giving each candidate an opportunity to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Mr. Lukovsky.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, WDSE, for the opportunity this evening to allow the constituents and voters of St. Louis County to get to know me a little bit better. My name is Jason Lakovsky. I am the current undersheriff for the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office, having been there for 24 years. I'm a lifelong St. Louis County resident, currently living in Friedenberg Township with my wife of 24 years, our 15-year-old son, and our 13-year-old daughter. I'm a graduate of Duluth-Denfeld High School, a graduate of the University of Minnesota Duluth, where I had the fortunate opportunity of playing 4 years of Division II baseball up there. During my tenure with the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office, I've achieved every promotable rank, and I've worked in every division within the organization.
Mr. Ramsay?
Well, thanks for the opportunity. It's exciting to be here. 29 days left or so. Again, appreciate the opportunity. Gordon Ramsay, I'm running for St. Louis County Sheriff. I too am from Duluth. I am a Duluth East grad. Went to Duluth Public Schools, graduated from UMD and St. Scholastica with my master's degree, and also am an FBI National Academy graduate. Got my start in policing early at age 20 in Iron River, Wisconsin. And after graduating from UMD, came to Duluth PD, where I worked my way up the ranks as well. A lot of community policing, worked primarily in the Central Hillside, and was promoted to chief in 2006 and was chief for 10 years. Live in Lester Park with my wife of 25 years, Tracy. We have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old as well.
Okay. Well, we will start my first question for you, and this will go to you first, Gordon. Most of us don't really understand what exactly the job of sheriff is and how it works with other law enforcement and agencies. So the geography of St. Louis County is large, but that job is really large too. So what to you are some of the most important parts of the job of sheriff?
Yeah, well, law enforcement and public safety is all about relationships. And from my perspective, that's how you solve crime, that's how you keep people safe. The Sheriff's Department has many entities underneath it. That is 911, the jail, emergency management, and of course the law enforcement entity. So it's complex. I have been in policing now for 29 years. My last job, we had a dispatch center, we had holding facilities, and about 1,000 employees with a budget of about $110 million. So, the last few years have been very tough in law enforcement, dealing with a lot of the societal issues.
Mm-hmm. Same question for you, Jason, about what are some of the most important parts of the job of sheriff?
Well, as you alluded to, law enforcement is just one aspect. We often are overlooked in terms of what our duties and responsibilities are. We're generalized as police officers. But like Gordon said, we do have the 911 Communication Center. It is a primary PSAP serving a city of the first class, being Duluth. There are 200,000 calls for service that are processed through that center on a yearly basis. We dispatch for over 180 user agencies within the county. That's law, fire, EMS, and that is countywide. one of the additional responsibilities is in fact the correctional setting. We have a full-time jail at the Haynes Road in Duluth, and we do have 2 facilities, lockup facilities in Virginia and Hibbing. So from that correctional standpoint, the 911 communication standpoint, the law enforcement standpoint, those are all duties that befall a sheriff.
So let's talk a little bit about how the Sheriff's Department works with other law enforcement. You have both mentioned Duluth Police Department. How do things work between different kinds of law enforcement? Or is information shared? Could that be better in the future? Could you we'll start with you, Jason, on this one.
Well, the information sharing has taken a drastic turn for the worse over the last 4 years. We used to be a conglomerate of multiple agencies within the Arrowhead region. We used to all share the same record management system, or RMS. Decisions were made for certain entities to migrate away from that RMS. So now we are not all on the same page. Whether we get there in the future is yet to be seen. I had a front row seat to those decisions in terms of me being a supervising deputy of our 911 center. So the importance of information sharing for the safety of our men and women on the street is in fact important. And I was able to work with those entities that chose to leave to ensure that they were receiving their CAD data. That's the 911 data that goes to the law enforcement officials on the street.
And same question for you, Gordon, kind of how, maybe from your past experience too, how information can be shared or how law enforcement can be working together.
We really had a model that we worked on during my time as chief, and the whole Arrowhead region was on the same system, the same records management system. So we could share information with Lake, Cook, Carlton, all of St. Louis County, Pine for a short time, and it was a tremendous system. That kind of information sharing makes us better, but it did fall apart in the last few years, and it's something that needs to be done. As a matter of fact, some police officers in some cities can't communicate with dispatch outside of on the police radio or a phone, and that kind of computer communication is important, and it's something that needs to be fixed right away. As well as, on the Iron Range, one of the things I want to do is bring everybody together for bi-weekly meetings where we talk about crime that's happening, share information, and really work in an effort to attack the habitual offenders and those drug dealers that are wreaking havoc up there. There's a need for that coordination right now. It's not happening.
So I want to follow up with each of you on this, kind of how could it be better? It sounds like the communication is not great there. Do you have ideas on what could be better? We'll start with you and we'll go back to you, Jason.
Yeah, well, this was something that I worked a lot on, and I do believe strongly in collaboration and having all the entities in this area sharing the same system. Now, it may be cost prohibitive for some at this point because other decisions have been made and the group's really splintered. But from my perspective, it is very important that we put together a plan and start working on it immediately so that dispatchers can communicate better with officers and that we get that information sharing back. The current system that the county is using for records management is old, it's cumbersome, and people want to get away from it. So we need to come together and figure out a plan. Other entities such as Duluth, Hermantown, Virginia have already gone to other systems. Same with the other counties. I think we need to look and see what is best and try and collaborate with those and bring that communication back to where it was.
How about you, Jason, ideas on how to make the system better?
Well, that communication needs to be there. There are current avenues or venues for collaboration as it stands right now. As Gordon had mentioned, there was a nemesis group. We did have monthly meetings. There is an opportunity to come to those meetings, explain what your needs are as a group. So participation is key, communication is key, but you need both things, right? So in order for us to make a collective decision about what's best, we need to communicate. But we also need to keep in mind that what's best for the city of Duluth or what's best for the Hibbing Police Department may not be best for a Gilbert Police Department or a Proctor Police Department because of their sizes. Their needs differ. Another major factor is what's good for a police department isn't necessarily good for a sheriff's office in terms of the information they're required to be responsible for. Police departments don't care about correctional data. So along with that RMS system, you have a JMS system, which contains all the medical records for the inmates. So there's a lot to it.
There is, but it's critical though we get the law enforcement all in the same system, because we're losing good opportunities to catch crooks and connect the dots, and it's really critical right now. We're not in a good place as far as the record systems goes.
Well, let's add another layer of complication. How is the relationship, we'll start with you, Gordon, on this one, with tribal police? Fond du Lac Band and Bois Forte Band are within St. Louis County. How will you approach that relationship?
Sure. I've had discussions with both, and from my perspective, there is it's a partnership that needs to be fostered and continually worked upon. I think right now there aren't any issues. There's always room for improvement. And the needs on the reservations are different. And that community policing point where people know their deputies and law enforcement is critical for success and getting information. And relationships really drive what we do, and it drives our success. We can't be just driving through. We need to stop, talk, and get to know the people in the service areas.
Jason, for you, what about the relationship with the bands?
We have very good working relationships with both bands. In fact, currently we are entering into a contract with the Bois Forte Band in order to house federal inmates. Okay. So, there is constant communication. We do deal with the tribal boards. We understand what their needs are. One thing to keep in mind in terms of Fond du Lac versus Bois Forte is an open versus a closed reservation. So some subtle differences, but ultimately the men and women of all agencies work well together.
The jail contract with Bois Forte has been going on for years. It hasn't been signed. They have expressed frustrations and really would like to get that done. And that would be a priority for me on working through that and getting that accomplished.
It'll be finished before the election.
Well, so what I'm learning about the sheriff, the St. Louis County Sheriff in this role, it's not just law enforcement, as you said, it's much bigger than that. It's almost as if you're managing a business and you have a budget to work with. Can you kind of give us some idea, we'll start with you, Jason, on idea of your background when it comes to budgets and finances and ways that you have impacted the departments that you have served?
So, $42 million budget, I think $43 million budget for 2023. My experience over the last 2 years has been largely hands-on with the budget. So as my time as a supervising deputy in the 911 division, there are 3 budgets associated with that division. One is the 911 Communications Center, which is a $6 million budget. You have your emergency management radio maintenance division, which in total encompasses about $11 million. The technology associated with that 911 center is just amazing. It's constantly changing, it's constantly evolving. I was able to take advantage of cost savings through grant opportunities. We were able to create a 911 backup center at our emergency response center. Prior to that, there was no affordable backup. We had to rely on Carleton County to transfer our calls to in the event something happened at our physical location. Now we're dependent solely on ourselves. We can flip the switch through CenturyLink and reroute those calls and relocate staff so that we don't degrade service.
And for you, Gordon, in terms of budgeting and finances from your past that you will use in the role if you were elected?
Sure. Well, being a chief for 16 years, budget's been a major part of that. And whether it was Duluth's budget, which was $26 million, or Wichita's budget, which was $110 million, that is a big part of it. The reality is, though, oftentimes in public safety, the overwhelming majority of the budget goes towards salary and benefits. Very little, very small portion goes to tires and facilities and things along those lines. But the thing people need to keep in mind is the economy is the inflation is a concern. And from my perspective, I've always tried to be wary of spending concerned about the taxpayer's dollar. For instance, we built the new police headquarters with the county with the idea of sharing more services together so that we could maybe save some money. There's a lot of opportunities to do that right now. There's little to no collaboration in that effort. So when you look at my 16 years of budget, very few years have gone over because that is a major concern of mine. I want to make sure that we're good stewards of the taxpayers' dollar.
So let's move on to, as a law enforcement, we'll start with you on this, Gordon. Sometimes you're meeting people on the worst day of their life, and law enforcement have a really difficult job to do. People who are having a difficult time sometimes they're not trusting law enforcement because of the way the world is right now. Some people might think that you're not looking out for their best interests. How do you serve a diversity within our community, the diversity of people who need the help of law enforcement?
Yeah, well, that's a complex question. There's a lot of issues there. You know, over the last 30 years, we've seen this over-reliance on law enforcement to deal with societal ills, mental health issues, chemical dependency issues. Meanwhile, the state and feds have backed off of funding of mental health help. And right now, 35–40% of the individuals at the county jail suffer from some type of mental illness. A much higher percentage, close to 90% for chemical dependency. And it seems that a lot of these societal issues have been pushed toward the criminal justice system. So we need to look at other ways of doing that and decoupling law enforcement and the criminal justice system from these societal ills. We can't continue to rely on 911 and police to solve all these issues. One of the ways we did, in 2013, we went to the county board in Duluth and asked for an embedded social worker to come inside the department and look at our mental health calls and make sure we were being responsive and stabilizing those individuals that were in crisis rather than continually sending police back over and over again. And really, that's the future.
For you, Jason, how will you serve the diversity of the whole community for people who may not trust law enforcement?
Well, we're going to continue doing what we're doing. As Gordon mentioned, the establishment of that county social health worker has evolved over those passing years. We are in a tremendous spot right now. There's additional resources that have been allocated towards that unit. The pilot was, in fact, in Duluth, the city of Duluth, but now we do have 2 responders up on the Iron Range, servicing the rural communities and the smaller cities of Hibbing and Virginia. So that co-response model definitely works. We as law enforcement need to understand and recognize the fact that our response models need to change. When Gordon and I were brought up in law enforcement, we sent a deputy or a peace officer to all of those calls. Oftentimes, sending a uniformed police officer to those calls escalates the situation, and I think we are better recognizing that there are other mental health professionals that can serve the person in crisis, in need, and we need to work cooperatively with that. The launch of 988, the suicide prevention hotline here in July, has been huge. It's a diverging of resources that normally we would have relied on, but I think we're getting the people better help immediately.
So, in talking about when you both started in law enforcement, have things changed when it comes to mental health? How law enforcement are trained now? Is this more a part of the training to become an officer?
I think there's additional training out there. I think we're reducing the stigma behind the mental health crisis. I think we're learning a lot from our mental health practitioners and partners as to how to best serve these people. We are understanding that oftentimes it's not just the mental health crisis, but it could be a substance use disorder on top of it. So collaborating, being involved, being at the table to ensure that we're working with our local partners and providing the best service to those in need.
Gordon, for you, have you seen a change in the training when it comes to things like mental health and substance abuse?
Yeah, well, not only in the training, but in the calls.
Okay.
In the early and mid-90s, mental health calls were few and far between, and now it is a significant amount of the calls. And, what we saw after I became chief in Duluth was that our training wasn't sufficient for our officers. The only training I had was what I got in undergrad at UMD, a psychology class. There was no psychology training in the academies. So we've since added that. We created in 2011, 2012, we created the Crisis Intervention Team, which brought significant advanced training for officers as part of a regional team that we started in Duluth. And that specialized training, no doubt, has helped us move in the right direction. But the reality is that, our police aren't always the best people to respond, and that, the men and women on the departments are expected to know a lot and deal with everything. When you look at the increase in behavioral disorders, we expect a lot of them. And, the training is something that we constantly have to work on, but talking about budgets and whatnot, that's something we struggle with.
So let's talk about the law enforcement. It's a very difficult job. This is a critical time in the world. How is their mental health? How is morale? How will you deal with that to make the job better for people on the ground?
Yeah. Morale in policing is difficult, right? I mean, when I was a senior at East High School as part of a government project, I wrote Eli Militich a letter asking him why he allowed the morale of the Duluth Police Department to be so low, right? That was going back a long ways. It's almost an occupational hazard that the calls that we go on and the work that we do impacts the mental health of our officers and staff. Not only law enforcement, but dispatchers and those in corrections. And the way it used to be dealt with is very different than today. And we focus more and more on their mental health wellness, and there are best practices that we need to follow and make sure that our staff are fine-tuned and ready to go. Such things as encouraging them to get mental health checkups throughout the year, or making them mandatory, or some of the trends that are going on now that I think are very important.
Jason, for you, in terms of morale and mental health of the people that work for you?
Yep. I think that we have come a long way, again, in terms of the times when we started versus now, the recognition that officer wellness is very important, not only for our own staff, but just so that they're healthy to be able to do the job. So, number one, destigmatize that need for help, reinforce and encourage from the top down that, it is okay. It is okay if you have a bad day and you need to speak with somebody. At the sheriff's office, we implemented a peer support team. So within each division, there are representatives so that when somebody's having a rough time, they want to talk to somebody, they can do so in confidence, and we can assure that we get them to a good spot. Additionally, we've taken it a step further and we've contracted with a mental health professional. If our employees or our staff don't feel comfortable dealing with someone internally, they can go external and they can keep it private.
So let's move on to recruitment and retaining law enforcement. We hear a lot about this in other professions, that people are leaving. What's going on? We'll start with you, Jason, on this in terms of recruiting, but also recruiting diverse people, so that the people that they serve may look like them, if that
Sure.
makes sense.
So currently, all divisions are experiencing a diminished applicant pool, perhaps especially law enforcement, and that goes back to 2.5 years ago when we kind of got a black eye for some of the law enforcement tactics that were being portrayed on the evening news and what we were seeing. But in terms of recruitment, we've been entertaining new endeavors in terms of how do we best fit or hit the market that we want to. St. Louis County numbers in terms of diversity need to improve. We're underrepresented in certain areas. We're aware of that. So the importance of working with HR to find out where we find those numbers for a more representative, department, and also how do we do it in a new way. One of the biggest things that we're trying now is the jail administrator had a great idea to put it at Marcus Theaters prior to the showing of a movie. There's a 30-second spot. So you're hitting multiple people in different ways. There's an initiative we're gonna do TV ads. I think we've been seeing some of that regionally. So again, being creative, working with HR, and allowing the administrators within the organization to really branch out and try something new.
Gordon, for you in terms of recruitment and recruiting more diverse law enforcement?
Yeah, it's a challenge, no doubt about it, but it can be overcome, and there's successful stories out there. And you know, in Wichita, we took the number of women from 11%, which is about the national average, to almost 17%. The number of Black and Hispanic and Latino and Asian numbers went up significantly. As a matter of fact, some of our recruit classes of 30 plus were a majority of people of color. And we did it through a strategic recruiting plan, partnering with universities and colleges in the area, partnering with military bases, finding the right people to do the recruiting. And we more than doubled our applicant numbers from 2016 to 2020 when everybody else's were going down. And it's a team. It was getting the right people in the right seats. And then when people started to see people that looked like them and more women and classes that were majority women in several cases, it seemed to kind of have a flywheel concept where more women and more people of color applied. And it's something I'm proud of, and it's something that I think can be replicated.
So let's stay with that for a moment. I want to give you each time to say why you think someone should consider being a law enforcement agent in St. Louis County.
Well, so when you talk about recruiting, this is a cool county to work in, right? You talked about it at the beginning of the show, the geographical size, I mean, the beauty of it, the amount of just natural resources that are here, all the outdoor activities. If we were able to double those numbers in Wichita, I know we could do that here, given the beauty of this county. It's a cool place to work, and so I think that's easy. The issues that I hear from the staff are pay, benefits, that they're not keeping up competitively. So that's some things that need to be. There needs to be a comp study done to determine where we are, and that would be number one. But I do think a comprehensive recruitment and retention and wellness strategy has to be put together.
So why do you think, Jason, someone should consider this for their career?
Well, I think that law enforcement generally is looked upon favorably in the Arrowhead region. I think it's a noble profession. I'm proud to be a police officer, and the county is a great place to work. I've stayed here 24 years. I easily could have migrated to another organization. I believe another strong point is our culture. So our culture has always been one of enrichment and encouragement to go out and find out what you like to do, whether it's a school resource officer or an investigator or a detective. All of those specialty positions, canine. We do have boat and water. We have ATV patrol. So it's a combination of it all that I think is an attractant. It is a lure. And once you're here, I think people generally enjoy it. There's a mix of rural policing with maybe suburban policing. You kind of have it all. But we do need to take a serious look at wages. There are studies that have shown that we're falling behind. We need to stay on top of that. We need to ensure that we're competitive with other agencies so that we don't lose our good members.
Let's move on to drug crimes and overdoses. We're at an all-time high in our communities, especially when it comes to fentanyl. I wonder how you will address that crisis. What concerns you the most about that? And we'll go with you first, Gordon.
Well, the fentanyl deaths are alarming, and it's clearly the number one killer for non-natural death in the county. Predicted close to 70 overdose deaths this year, and that's not including those people that were saved. The numbers are trending in the wrong direction. And I think, some things that happened with COVID and just the social dynamics right now, we've got a lot of good people working on it. We started several projects back 10, 12 years ago collaboratively with social services and different chemical dependency groups and concerned citizens that have really evolved into some good things. But not everything we're doing is working. I think it's a problem particularly up on the Iron Range and in the northern part of the county. And that's where those collaborations with the local PDs, I think, is critical. where we work together and share information and who's doing what. Additionally, we used to have a federal prosecutor in Duluth, in the Duluth Federal Courthouse, and that no longer exists. And having gone away, I can see how we compare as far as federal resources go to help us with, getting the worst drug dealers out there. And I think that we're not getting our fair share of help. Those federal resources do not come here like other areas. And in turn, I think that hurts us. We can only do so much in our local law enforcement world. And when you talk about some of the amount of drugs that are coming into this area, really the federal government should be helping us more in that sense.
Jason, for you in terms of drug crimes and the increase in overdoses.
Yes, so our numbers will in fact set another all-time high in record for deaths and overdoses in general. My commitment has been to really focus on our Lake Superior Violent Offender Task Force and ensure that I, as an agency within that unit, provide the resources I can to ensure that those men and women are operational. They're doing tremendous work. They're making a dent, but they're never going to end it, that's for sure. I do think we need to send a message at the federal level, and we can work cooperatively with our county attorney's office to make sure that when you bring drugs into this community and you're also carrying a gun, which you should not have, we're going to make a message. We're going to send a message to you, and hopefully, I know this isn't the right philosophy to have as law enforcement, but maybe you'll go somewhere else, right? We need to focus on our communities. The Iron Range is not immune as well. There are differences in terms of what we're able to do, but it is that cooperative effort. We need to understand who the people are. We need to target the people that are bringing drugs into our community.
The other side of this too, and a lot of people look toward law enforcement as kind of the leader on this issue, or why isn't law enforcement doing more? The reality is, if someone was to come to Jason or I today and they didn't have insurance and they said, hey, I am an addict and I want to get into treatment right now, the reality is it's probably months before they can get in. And that is something that as sheriff, we need to share that information with the public so people can advocate for that. But that is a big piece of this that often doesn't get discussed.
You both mentioned lack of federal involvement. Do you have ideas on how to get that back? How does that process work?
Yeah, well, it works discussion with the U.S. Attorney for Minnesota, as well as our elected federal officials, okay. Congressperson, as well as senators.
Yeah, Jason?
Yeah, and so we've already had one of those pre-meetings. Kim Mackey, the now, interim county attorney. We've established those relationships. Now it's just making sure that the feds follow through with their promise, right? They've said they'd throw resources at some of our cases. I do believe that both north and south, we have a number of good examples of people that are deserving of some federal attention. It's just a matter of holding them to the fire and making them help us.
So yet another part of this job of the St. Louis County Sheriff. I want to get into some of the questions that we got this week from our listeners and viewers. The first question, and we'll start with you, Jason. What methods will your department use or train in that will de-escalate emotionally charged situations?
So Minnesota Post Board has now rightfully required peace officers in the state of Minnesota to take de-escalation training. So not only are we doing that organizationally, but all law enforcement officials are. It's one of those recognitions I was talking about earlier in terms of our response model. So we will comply with those requirements. We also encourage all staff to seek out trainings on their own that they feel would benefit them. Throughout the course of your career, you're always evaluating what you feel your strengths and weaknesses are, and part of a good police officer is recognizing, identifying those weaknesses and seeking out that training.
Gordon, for you, de-escalation and training?
Well, this is something we talked about in Duluth a decade plus ago. It is clearly a community concern, And we have implemented policies and training and set the expectations and tried to hire the right people with the right mindset to get into that role, right? That's something we focused on. We also focused on, long before it was the buzzword, we focused on the duty to intervene. That is, when you see someone, another officer that's not having a good day and is escalating the situation, that you pull them aside, and that the policies and training dictate that. Those are some of the things that we've done. The body cameras have really helped address concerns and complaints and training issues, and I think that has been helpful as well.
I want to hear more about the body cameras, but first we'll get to another question from a viewer. As St. Louis County Sheriff, you'll have power and influence, and this person says, I want to trust my elected officials, but with hearing about the data leak of the Oath Keepers and that many members of the right-wing group are currently working in law enforcement, I'm concerned, says this viewer. So how will you handle the issue of Oath Keepers when it comes to your employees, but also that public appearance?
Yeah, well, it starts with proper vetting in the start, right? A thorough background investigation. That is one where you go and you knock on neighbors' doors, you call ex-boyfriends, ex-girlfriends, you dig to find out that they have a clean background. You do psychological testing, extensive psychological testing. So that's kind of phase one of that. But you have to continue to monitor the behavior. And this is really where first-line supervisors and that duty to intervene come into play, and that when you do start to see employees that maybe have some extreme views or have some concerning views, that it's looked into. Once you lose public trust, you can't get it back. This is clearly a concern of the community, and we've seen it across the country where these issues have popped up, and it is something that we need to monitor and make sure that we are ahead of.
Jason, for you?
Yeah, so it starts right from the beginning. We try and hire people with a high moral character. Part of that is, the interview process, the background process, and their initial stages of employment. That's why we have probationary periods. But organizationally, again, that culture is a big part of it. That frontline supervision is in fact part of it. And your policies. Your policies are meant to guide, ensure that your people are doing the right things, and give them guidance in terms of what the expectations are. I think that locally, and I say the Arrowhead region, again, we have really good men and women that are out on the street doing the jobs. You're always going to have those situations where someone maybe makes a poor choice, but you address it immediately. You don't be dismissive of it. You be transparent about how you're dealing with it, and again, knowing what the expectations of your constituents are will help guide you through that process.
Well, let's get back to body cams, but also you both have worked in law enforcement for your whole career. Are there innovations or new ideas that you have you'd like to use in the future, or that you have used that have made some positive impacts? And kind of talk a little bit about this change in using body cams.
So technology will be ever changing. I think one of the biggest frustrations for administrators is the fact that once you make a major implementation, within literally 4 years, you're spending an equal amount of money to upgrade. But that's part of it. That commitment needs to be there. I think from technology, drones have been a big game changer for officer safety for the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office. We can put that piece of equipment in places where normally a deputy was put in harm's way, or your canine. So we need to recognize where those technological pieces fit, how to best use them. From a rescue squad standpoint, there will always be a commitment to our underwater recovery ROVs and just our sonars and all of that. So probably the biggest thing, I don't want to be, I got to answer the body camera question.
Yeah.
We're recently implemented 100%. We're in our first 3 months, and I think there's been large acceptance by our staff. They were a long time coming, and I think moving forward, we're only going to increase or strengthen the faith of the public just because of that transparency issue.
And it's new, but has there been public response to the body cams? Has that been positive?
As a part of the implementation, we were required to have a public comment period while we were developing our policy. There was overwhelming positive response. You're always going to have some of the negative comments. Again, there are people in our county that felt we should have had them years ago, but we have them now. There is overwhelming support by the residents for our usage of them.
So Gordon, talk more about now using body cams, but also any innovations that you have seen or you see coming.
Yeah, well, body cams have been a great tool for us. It's really helped us with prosecutions and helped us in so many ways. And when we first implemented in Duluth, we did it probably a decade ago now, or almost a decade, and we were one of the first in the country to do so. And I'm proud of that fact. And that technology is something that I've pushed every year as chief. And when it comes to reducing crime, when I was a chief in Duluth, we reduced shootings significantly, robberies significantly, burglaries significantly, and technology helped us in many ways. And one of the things we did in Wichita was we created a crime gun intelligence center where we partnered with federal agencies to do ballistics testing of those casings that were found at crime scenes. And we were a leader in the country on that. And I'm proud of that because it helped us solve a lot of the shootings that were going on. With the increase in shootings in St. Louis County, that's one thing that I want to look into and want to make sure we're doing everything we can to turn this tide on what's happening.
We've talked about some of the big issues within law enforcement or some of the things that are facing our communities. We did have another viewer who asked about effective ways for your department to stop sex trafficking in our region that is currently going on. And I think it might be you, Gordon, on this first.
Yeah, so the question was?
How will you stop sex trafficking in the region?
Yeah, well, it's a significant issue. And this was another example of, how going away has made me a better leader. The way things were done in other parts of the country are different than here. And when I started in the 90s, runaways were seen as kind of a nuisance. That they were difficult to find, and we actually gave the runaway follow-ups on interns. The best practice now is that every time a runaway is located, that a detective in the sex crimes unit is called night or weekends or whenever. When that young child is found, they are called in. Because we now know that 65 to 70% of all runaways somehow get involved in sex trafficking to some extent. So when we get that kid in our custody, there is an opportunity to get them out. So there are best practices that are reducing the amount of sex trafficking going on and helping our kids stay out of that. So that's one thing that is important to me, because it also disproportionately impacts poor kids and kids of color. And I want to make sure we're doing everything we can to keep them safe and ensuring that we are up to speed on how what best practices are is important to me.
Jason, for you?
I think, yes, we need to involve ourselves. We need to understand the fact that any time there is involvement by juveniles, we need to take it seriously. That's resulted in some of the changes to our missing person laws, and the change is good. We also need to work cooperatively with our local shelters to understand, and listen to what they're hearing. We have seen success in participating in for lack of a better term, sting operations. There were 3 here done over the course of the last year and a half that resulted in over 15 arrests in one example, just on the outskirts of Duluth. So we need to target those predatory offenders. I'm not going to throw out a stat that I can't back up, but if they're preying on juveniles, most likely, they're also engaged in other criminal activity as well in terms of, it's sexual in nature. So it's a worthy effort. We're obligated to do so. They are our youth. We need to really understand how we best can help them.
Unless it affects you or your family, it's not something that a lot of people even know much about in terms of sex trafficking. How do you think the public could be also maybe assisting or to be looking for things out there that might lead you to some of these underground rings or some of the stuff that's happening?
Well, I think, just in general, any crime or tip information, if you're seeing something that you're uncomfortable with, it doesn't look right. I know where my kids were when, they were coming home from school. If I wasn't able to pick them up, somebody else was able to. But if you're seeing things that don't make sense to you, call either, if it's a non-emergency, call the 911 non-emergency line. Find out the location that it's in. If it's the city of Duluth, call one of their bureau numbers. If it's in St. Louis County, call our investigative lines and report it and have us look into it.
Gordon, for you?
Yeah, so much today is communicated through social media, and the Sheriff's Department doesn't use social media. And for me, getting information out when a kid is missing or there's some critical incident is very important. And we're missing a big piece right there. People want to help law enforcement. And you see it in the amount of shares when a missing child is put out there. So that's one area, that communication piece. Not only when someone is missing, but also just sharing the stats, like, how vulnerable these young kids are when they do run away, and engaging the community to help us. And when we feel that someone is in danger and we put that out, we want their help. That's how we save these kids, is by providing information and data.
We've talked a lot about here from both of you about communication. I'm wondering, there's a lot of misinformation in the world when it comes to all kinds of different things. So people might be getting information about the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office that isn't correct. How do you get the right information out? How do you communicate with the public and approach this?
Is there anything specific?
Well, I'm just curious if you even talked about with the last few years in terms of how law enforcement was viewed. How do you communicate to the public, like how hard the officers are working or the people under you are working, or what you're trying to do in the community?
We do need to be better marketers of ourselves. We have tremendous staff in 3 different divisions that do wonderful work on a daily basis. And I think that the more interactions that we can have with community members, the more events that we continue to participate in, it reinforces that public trust. Oftentimes, if you don't have a relative in law enforcement or a friend in law enforcement, you don't know much about a police officer. And it isn't until you have the ability to interact with one of them when you're not in crisis or in a time of need and get to see us at face value and realize that, our daughters play volleyball, our kids play sports, our sons are out there in the community as well, and many of our staff are the same way. So, I would encourage people to call us up, invite us over for an event. We see that at National Night Out. It's wonderful. That time of year is just great. Our officers are on a different level. They come down a notch. They know what it's about. But the more and more you do that, you don't just need a national night out. You can do that all times of the year.
Gordon?
Yeah, the guiding philosophy really should be building relationships with the communities that you serve. And there's some deputies that do a great job of it. There's some townships that I visited that have never seen a deputy or had a crime report or know who serves them. Those relationships are important for establishing what's happening. When people are very interested in law enforcement. I mean, it's some of the top watched shows out there. People want to know what's going on. They want to know who the people are behind the badge. So there's things like the Citizens Police Academy that we've done in Duluth since 96, 97. It's a great opportunity for people to come inside the department and see it from the inside out and meet people they normally wouldn't meet. I want to establish that at the Sheriff's Department so people can see what's happening there and get to know people. But that relationship piece, when I was a beat officer, I got to know people on my beat that remain friends to this day, and it was very rewarding. When we talk about that occupational hazard, sometimes in law enforcement where it becomes us versus them, that's how we can avoid that. When the law enforcement gets to know the people that they serve. It was rewarding for me. I got more information on crime. I was safer because people helped me when I was in trouble. And I loved my job because the community and I became friends.
So I'm assuming that your jobs have not been like what it's like on TV for law enforcement. That it's a different actual experience. I want to give you the opportunity. What's a good day? Give us an example of a good day for you on the job, either now or early in your career. And we can start with you, Gordon.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that this job has been, in the last 10 years, starting with Ferguson on, it's been very difficult. And, the mistrust, when I started in '93, I would have thought by now we would have very strong relationships. I never would have guessed we were in this place we are today. I thought back then we'd have a tool that could incapacitate someone without killing them, right? It still doesn't exist. We have the formula for improved relations. We don't always use it. We hire standard issue people. While I love cops, people in public safety, they're like everybody else. They make mistakes. What do we do when a well-intended officer makes a mistake? And it's not criminal intent. It was a mistake. Those are some of the difficult things that we deal with. But I'll tell you, last year alone, I had 4 police officers shot in the line of duty in 3 different incidents. I had an in-line of duty death. It's a stressful time. You have, we had the COVID lockdown. We had all the dynamics with that. We've had this increase in crime, and it's a challenging job right now, and we need someone that's going to stand up for police officers and encourage good people to enter the profession.
Jason, what's a good day for you in your field?
Watching my staff do tremendous things. So the plane crash that we recently had in Hermantown, watching and hearing about how our 911 telecommunicators worked together, handled that incident, ensuring that the responding firefighters, the responding law enforcement officers were safe. It sounded like it was a pretty chaotic scene, but I'm proud of the job that they did, and that's a good day for me. In terms of my career, being like TV, I kind of had little brief spurts. I was a SWAT guy of 16 years, so there was a little bit of excitement there, but for the most part, no. We're not as glamorous as what they make it out to be.
So we want to give you both the chance to tell us why you are the right candidate for St. Louis County Sheriff, and Jason, we'll start with you.
Well, again, I want to thank WDSE and you, Heidi, for this opportunity. I feel that over the course of my 24 years, I've proven myself in the many roles that I've served. As I alluded to, I'm very proud of my profession. I'm dedicated to this community, and I think that we have an opportunity here to turn the page. We're losing a sheriff of 5 terms, 20 years, and so we have an opportunity to change organizationally, but yet continue doing the things that we have been doing well. Our command staff has also turned over. 6 of the 10 members of our command staff are new. So we're not necessarily waiting for Sheriff Littman to go out the door to affect change. We saw that with the body cams. I could have easily saved that and said, it was my idea. No, we're doing what's best for the citizens. We're doing what's best for our staff. One last thing. I want to wish my wife a happy birthday this evening. I couldn't share it with her. I'll be home soon. Thank you for your support.
Gordon, and your final thoughts on why you're the right candidate for St. Louis County Sheriff.
Well, I'm excited to be here, and I too appreciate the opportunity by Channel 8 and your fair questions. When you look at the county now and where things are at, I think there is some areas that really need work. The number of dispatchers, we went from a minimum of 9 to 7, and in many cases we're hemorrhaging staff at the sheriff's office. It is really critical we turn that around for the public safety. And I have a 16-year track record of ensuring that we have people in the seats and reducing crime and building trust. And if I get in, you get both of us.
Well, thank you so much. That is it for our time tonight on Forum in the Northland. I would like to thank the candidates, Gordon Ramsay and Jason Lukovsky, for sharing their time tonight and for their dedication to public safety. And to our audience, now that you've heard from the candidates, it is time to do your part. Our democracy is built on one person, one vote. Do your patriotic duty and vote either November 8th at the polls or in person at your local clerk's office or by mail. If you do vote by mail, make sure your ballot is received by November 8th or it won't be counted. If you missed any part of this program, you can watch it on our website, WDSE.org. For the team here at WDSE, I'm Heidi Holtan. Good night.